Hey, there she is.
Hey,
Hey,
hi
Bobby, how
Liz.
are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good, good. Oh, look, we got the same poster.
Which one? Oh yeah, look at that. Oh yeah, basta. Yeah, I love that poster.
I do too.
That's one of my favorites. So yes, I appreciate the artwork behind you. Like that's definitely something I love to do is just surround myself with like artwork of things that I love, music and all kinds of things and social justice movements. I have a whole binder of just of posters.
You
I
do.
do. I do. I have my mom's for
Fantastic.
housing. I have to find a place for it somewhere here too.
Nice, nice. Well,
Yeah.
let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm Liz Huck. I'm from Oakland Rising, and welcome to Monday Meals, Bobby.
Hey, thank you.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Bobby Lopez. I work for Build Affordable Faster, California, which is, basically we are an affordable housing developer that started like a policy wing, and we're working regionally. So, I myself am, based out of Oakland, but we do statewide and regional work, mostly on affordable housing. But one of the things we've been really wanting to support is also supporting, community-based work across the region. And one of the big things that has been coming up is redistricting, which Oakland Rising was very involved in. Not only in creating the independent commission, which I think that is a really important thing to have this process separate from a political one. And also, I think just in making sure that community folks knew about the process and getting involved and pushing for a very just city. So I really appreciate your leadership on that. Happy
Oh,
Valentine's Day as well. Um,
yeah.
and happy,
How
I
did
think,
you celebrate? How are you celebrating Valentine's Day?
epic fail because I started looking for reservations for restaurants in Oakland, and I should know by now that the day before you're not going to find much. So I got to really find a way of making up for my lack of Valentine's Day planning. I mean, it fell on a Monday. Mondays are hard. It's a work
They
day,
are hard. They
but
are hard.
I gotta nourish my relationship, so I gotta come up with something creative in the next couple hours.
Oh, okay,
Do
okay.
you
Well,
have any
if y'all
suggestions?
have some suggestions, drop them in the chat for Bobby because we need to spread the love and make sure the love is happening everywhere.
That's
Um,
right.
Thanks for joining Monday Meals
Yeah,
today. So I think this is your first time, and so
yeah.
Monday Meals, it comes from the title. We came up with it because back a few years back, I was kind of running a side hustle where I was making meals on Sunday and I was delivering it
Mm,
on Mondays. And it ended up being a really nice time because every time someone picked it up or I dropped it off, I got to like check in with people, with the folks and
yeah,
like, how are you doing? What's up with you? And so that's kind of what Monday Meals is. It's like over lunch, we're just chopping it up with like people we love. We love the work that they do, and just like talking about what's going on in Oakland and in Alameda County. And you and I have been involved like on text threads on during the redistricting commission meetings. Like, what did he say? What are they doing? Kind of thing. So it's been nice to just been able to talk with you about it too. And so, always ask two questions about Monday meals. One
yeah.
is, what are you having for lunch?
Well, actually, what I'm having for lunch, I love supporting some of the businesses in my community, and so I love to go to like Los Moles down the street. I'm probably going to go to Mariposa, which is this kind of gluten-free space, which is really yummy.
I
And
love that
so,
bakery.
I wish I could say I can cook, and I love that you do Monday meals because so much of our culture is surrounded in food, and like how we communicate is food, and our
Yeah,
love language is food as well.
that's right.
Um, so that said, I can't cook. But
So
I
don't
do
make that
love,
suggestion for Valentine's Day. Don't put
yeah,
that in the chat,
no,
y'all.
no. But I'm just excited to just go around all the amazing small businesses that are here and just grab a quick brunch and bite probably mariposa today.
Oh, I love it. They make really good sandwiches.
They do. They really
Their
do.
sandwiches are good.
Yeah.
So if you're gluten free, check out that bakery. It's in Temescal area
Yeah.
ish, and and then the other question that we always ask is, well, I'm having my smoothie for now. But
Sparkling water.
for the other question we always ask is, how are you nourishing yourself? So not just on the whole self-care tip, but like what are the ways that you're like filling into yourself and
Yeah.
not just like repairing from all the crazy stuff that we deal with every day, right? But like what is it that what do you do as a practice to nourish your heart, your mind, your spirit, your body, any of those or all of those?
I mean, for me, it's always been music. So music is my outlet.
That's
So
right.
let me see if I
Y'all
can.
don't know. Bobby is a DJ.
So I got my little like record collection over there. Then I got
Hey,
my little DJ setup over there.
hey.
And then my music setup, so keyboard and drums. And
I
when I
love
have a moment, I
it.
really try to just nourish it that way.
Ah,
Yeah.
nice.
So it's just something that has always been. And my dad played music. My dad played guitar, bass, and just. So it's always been a part of my environment. My parents really played a lot of like nueva trova, which is like folk music from Latin America.
I love
So
it.
yeah, so I have a whole collection of like 60s and 70s nueva trova, and I myself, I'm a big salsa, merengue, Latin music. That's kind of my thing. That's what I love to do. And I used to have a little club. Unfortunately, the club space closed down, and I know that I've stepped away from the collective, but I used to be part of a music collective called Queer Cumbia, and it just really nourished me a lot. And I still do the music, even if it's just for me, right?
I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. I love music too. And like um, I grew up in the church, and so my dad was a pastor, and
Oh,
so,
wow. Yeah.
but I don't do the church thing myself anymore. But if I go back to a church and I hear like gospel songs or hymns, it creates an emotional reaction in me.
Yeah.
It's like very like it hits right to my heart immediately, and like a lot of mixed emotions come up, to be really
Yeah.
honest, but there's always like this real place of joy for me around it, and so
Yeah.
music is always a big part of like my life too, and I appreciate that
Yeah.
that's yours as well. Yay. Um, and I've been trying to like feature at the beginning of each of our Monday meals these days. I've been trying to like put on like a Oakland musician or a band,
Mm.
and then feature them at least a minute, so that so that folks can also tap into some of that music as well. But let's get to like what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
Redistricting.
Oof. That was some long nights. I mean, it's still happening. I'm using the past tense, and there's absolutely nothing past tense about a redistricting process. It is still
That's right.
going on.
Oh my God.
Um, it was a lot. I mean, those are long meetings, and I have a lot of empathy for the commissioners who are, all volunteer, and a
That's
lot of
right.
them not politically involved, and now experiencing, what it means to be on a commission in Oakland, which shouldn't dissuade anybody. People should definitely be parts of commissions. We need representation on commissions.
That's right.
But I think it probably took them for a shock. And I was really sad to see one of the commissioners from my community have to step down just because it went past the timeline,
Yeah.
which was Tracy McKnight. But I felt like she just really engaged the process with like such dignity and just such like heart. I really appreciated her. But yeah, we're a month and 14 days past the process.
We
We're in this
are. We are.
gray
Well,
area.
I think what folks need to know, if you don't know, is
Yeah,
that this has been a public commission. So
yeah.
used to be before 2020 process, the census process in I'm sorry, before 2020 2014, when we passed a ballot measure to get the public commission, it redistricting
Oh,
lines
sorry.
were set by city council. And so off, you can imagine what
Yeah.
that process was like. It was, kind of closed door dealing. It wasn't super transparent. You could do what we do often with city council around policies. We could hit up, city council members and like push them, and they really could do things in their own self-interest, right?
Yeah.
Maybe for their own political career, which happened often. And so the public commission was meant to like really broaden that and like make it more transparent. So my understanding is that because of this process, we had like hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of people like across Oakland actually participate in ways that
Yeah.
weren't engaged before. And so that's like a big plus. But because it was like the first time,
Yeah.
it was a little messy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the nail. I mean, we all know stories in Oakland, and then when I used to work in San Francisco, of certain people getting cut out of districts, right? And I think that that is a
Like,
culture, like, oh wait, you're cut out. Wow. I think that's a culture that's always been in the redistricting world until you started kind of moving towards independence.
right.
And so I love the concept of independence. At first, I wasn't sure, to be honest,
Me
because I
too.
was nervous about handing over the future of a city to a group of folks who may or may not be that connected to Oakland, right? Who are all connected by living here. Everyone's connected here, but there's a wide range of folks. I mean, you're an Oakland native. I've been here 10 plus years, and there are folks in the commission to be here 1, 2 years. It doesn't make them less Oakland residents. It's just like, do they know the history, right? That was my
That's right.
concern.
That's right. And that's a big part of it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, because I'm sure when you first moved to Oakland and you started getting involved in things in Oakland, you know, you would meet people who have been
Yeah.
here like 2, 3 generations, or at least most of their lifetime, right? I wasn't born here, but I moved here when I was 10.
Oh yeah.
And so I grew up through a really hard time in Oakland. I grew up through
Yeah.
the war on drugs in deep East Oakland. And so like, you get, you know, you walk up and people give you the eye, like, where are you from?
Yeah.
Why are you here? And what are your intentions? And I think people have, you know, Oakland has been really taken advantage by so
Yeah.
many outside forces that have
Yeah.
greatly impacted our people and our communities. So, you know, I really appreciate that piece, Bobby, because you don't know these people.
Yeah.
You don't know how much they know about Oakland and what people have been through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think in retrospect, it was messy. And I think part of that lies in that, you know, there was an assumption of how much money was needed to promote the program and do
That's right.
outreach and things like that. But we're in a pandemic, right? And I think I think there's just a lot more disconnect during the pandemic. And so I think where we might be in 10 years, we don't know. But I think really kind of, and then also the means of communication have changed, like social media, things like that. And I think it's a reflection after whenever this process ends, which, you know, is still a question mark. You know, really reflecting on what's really needed to reach the most vulnerable communities, like what's really needed to reach like other language speakers, to come people where they're at, people who are in a house, people who are in deep East Oakland. Like, what do we really need to do to reach folks?
Right.
So they're part of this process.
Right.
Because even in this process, you know, and again, like, I will recognize I'm a D1 resident and I am in the flats, but I'm still a D1 resident. And this process was still lots of people calling in from Rockridge and Trestle Glen, which are communities I go to and hang out in, but not every Oakland resident has access to that. And
That's
so I
right.
think there's a reflection about, like, still in this process, some of the communities that know how to advocate, and thank God they know how to advocate for themselves, but like, it's a reflection that a lot of other communities still don't have that same access to resources. And so I think it's a lesson to be learned, and, you know, it is what it is, but I still think that the independence piece is important.
I do.
And so it's just, how do we just, you know, and it was the first time.
It was. And I think that I feel like I wouldn't necessarily say that the commission fumbled this, because
yeah, I agree.
When they realized that they actually needed to engage in, do more outreach, because they realized that the city
Yeah.
wasn't doing it for them,
Yeah.
that it was put on them to do it. So
Yep.
They hired an outreach consultant.
Yeah.
And Dr. Charisma AC and her group of folks, and with Eastside Arts Alliance, really then did the engagement for the last 3 months. And, you know, we saw thousands of people, like I said, really come into the conversation. And so, and then there was a lot of organizations that got involved, like Oakland Rising was there. You know, different unions came to the table, and as well as like Resilient Fruitvale, and there was different organizations throughout Oakland that really got involved, and that was really good to see, because it really sparked like really long conversation, like lots of public comments. That's why, hence, we would go until 2 a.m. in the morning for the past 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, it was to the point of delirium at some days, but like I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think that there were some real growing pains in this process, and there's still some things like I'm not happy about the map. Like I think the whole Coliseum thing, which is that's a hard thing to have kind of spoken up about it at the
Yeah,
last minute, and then to really move a Coliseum out of a district where that district has had a strong identity
yeah,
as the Coliseum being there. Like I just think in the last month or two of a process, that's like rough. And it's kind of shocking for those residents. At the same time, there were some other things that happened that were positive in this map. And I think that so we got to take a look at it and see what are the good things, what are the things that are still hard. I think for me, making sure there's a couple different things that were really important to me or important to folks around me, which was making sure that the Black Cultural Arts Zone was in downtown Oakland in District 3, adjacent to like in part of like the West Oakland community. I think making sure that the CVAP numbers, which are the voting age population in D5, that they're high for Latino community, making sure there's a solid API. I mean, I think you and I had these things aligned, making sure the
mm-hmm.
API community wasn't watered down by the influx of more affluent folks into the downtown area. Same for West Oakland. I don't think any of us wanted to see or want to see the impacts of gentrification in a way that disempowers. We want to, save and preserve and support our bases,
That's right.
that are there. And then, of course, there's Deep East Oakland,
That's
making
right.
sure Black and Brown folks really have voice. And I had a lot of really interesting combos. Like the Latino thing was really interesting because some of the commissioners really wanted to work on D7 being the Latino district, and I was like, a bunch of us were like, hold up, D5 is the historic heart. You have to look at the history and understand that, there are other districts that have a long in history of like Black leadership that has worked very closely with the Latino
That's
community.
right.
Like it's
Right.
not as simple as like, oh, this is the next Latino community. No,
Yeah.
hold up a second. Look at
Right.
the historic heart and then look at the alliances that happen in other districts and support that,
And that's
you know?
exactly what we were talking about earlier, right? Like
Yeah.
you got to know you got to know Oakland, and I think that a lot of folks who are more newer to Oakland recognize that Oakland historically has been a Black city, but if you don't know what that really looked like here in Oakland and where it happened in Oakland, in terms of um, deep roots of the Black community here, then I don't know. That was the part that always concerned me. Is that,
Yeah.
but what we do know, Bobby, which you probably know really well with your work in housing, is demographic has
Yeah.
changed, and
Yeah.
this goes to that place too where census data really was shot. It was shitty,
Yeah.
right? So like,
Yeah.
Trump really messed it up. He really fucked us all over. He messed us all up across the country in terms of
Yeah.
the census data, putting a lot of fear in our communities about actually filling out the census. So
Yeah.
when we look at the data
Yeah.
and we see who actually responded to the census,
Yeah.
that, like for example, in 2010, Chinatown's response rate was over 75%. This time it was below 56%. So it's like, that's a big dramatic shift, right? We saw parts of Deep East Oakland that also took dramatic drops in the census response. So in really clear precincts and
Yeah.
clear areas in Oakland. So we actually, Oakland Rising, if you all didn't see any of our town halls, we use some data from
Yeah.
the American Community Survey, and that is taken every 2 years in order to try to get a better capture of the data. But what we saw is actually we saw a growth of not only white but some Latinx and API communities in
Yeah.
D6 and 7, and so that's what folks were coming in going, well, we have this dramatic growth of Latinx voters and people in D6 and D7. So now it's a Latino, precinct or district. And I think there's a lot of like, oh, you all need to really hear about what that means and the impact that could potentially have.
Yeah.
And then what it means to actually save Black voting power in Oakland.
Yeah. Exactly. It's interesting what you're saying. I mean, because to me, working in affordable housing, the maps that we were looking at are like the urban displacement project maps.
That's
And
right.
that's the map that I sent in with my letter, our letter,
Mm-hmm.
because fundamentally for us, it was important for them to see this map to understand. And the two maps that we sent to them were donation maps to
That's
show
right.
the disproportionate amount of donation. So like my area, I think is like 6% of the donations versus some areas that are 24%. And
That's
then
right.
there are areas that only have 1% of all donations, you know?
And the
Um,
majority of those donations are coming from the hills.
oh yeah, by far the hills.
Yeah.
And so I think it was important for them to think about the power, how that works, even though I think a lot of folks raise concern about just having districts below the 580. I
Mm-hmm.
think we did it in a way, or the final map did it in a way to make sure that to acknowledge that there are also communities of color above the 580,
That's right.
right? But I think back to the urban displacement map, for me, it was really important for them to see that map so they could be like, okay, if we want to prioritize the voices of the people that are currently living in a district, for example, Fruitville, which is at risk of displacement. I mean, I right now live in a post gentrification neighborhood in what was historically predominantly a Black neighborhood,
That's right.
right? And my wife is, born and raised Oakland native. Like they're holding on to their house, but the reality is that's a lot of folks, right? And
Right.
and I think we don't want to see what happened in our neighborhood be the rest of Oakland. Like we
That's right.
don't, right? We
Right.
don't want everyone to point out to be like, this used to be historically a Black neighborhood. No, how do we preserve and make sure that we're creating vibrant communities that have access to power and voice through the redistricting process? By
Yeah.
looking at the map, that's how you do it, to make sure that those communities have voice and are not overpowered by other communities that have less access, that have a lot of access to power. You were
That's
saying,
right. And no, we
yeah,
were looking at those similar maps, right? Displacement maps.
yeah,
We were looking at campaign contribution maps. We were also
yeah,
looking at voting trends, right?
yeah,
Like what are the issues from the difference between homeowners and
and tenant,
renters,
yep,
right? And it was really interesting to be in conversation with homeowners, right? Who were like, we need to have lines like this. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. And then when I got to it, I was like, oh, that's because you represent homeowners. Like
yeah,
we're talking about tenants and renters and
yeah,
unhoused people who are really are often disengaged from the not disengaged. They are targeted to be left out of the conversation. Let's be real clear about that.
yeah,
And then also that when we looked at trends for how people were actually voting in Oakland, that oftentimes when we included the hills in all of our districts, that could potentially impact, some of what the policies that were going to impact the flatlands, right? And so
yeah,
we looked at Prop 21, we looked at Prop 15, we looked at a few propositions and measures that went through in the past two election cycles, and noticed that oftentimes
yeah,
when it came to housing, when it came to public safety, when it came to things like that, the hills often were very far from
yeah.
where the flatland people voted on, right? Like how we voted was very different.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting to look at those maps because it shows you that there's definitely a divide north and south. There's also somewhat of an east-west divide.
That's right.
And there's also there's also similarities. So when we looked at the tenant data and then we looked at like police reform, like those were pretty aligned. Which was interesting, right? Because people say,
Right.
oh, well, I'm in the flats, there's more crime, blah, blah, blah. We're probably going to be more against reform, but actually we're more in favor of reform than the hills.
That's right.
For a multitude of obvious reasons. But I think it's really interesting to say that, like, looking at all that data, I think probably where you and I definitely aligned was making sure that some of the flatland communities had the most voice possible because of that historic disenfranchisement of services. And we see that day in, day out.
Right.
I think that there's some amazing thing happening in the Department of Race and Equity under the leadership of Darlene Flynn,
Yes.
where we're starting to actually see the allocation of resources being a way that takes into account that historic divestment, to be very frank, of the flats. I mean,
That's right.
the paving plan was a perfect example because it's something so small as paving your streets. And then you realize, wait, not everybody's street looks like mine. Mine looks pretty bad, but not everybody has that. And why is that? And the hope for me, in whatever form we finally get this redistricting map, is to really have something that, you know, will allow those residents in those areas that feel like there's been historic divestment to be like, no, you are listening to me. Like you are, yeah, like you're accountable to me, to their elected official. And we're likely going to have quite a few openings in the next couple of years to really shift it up and you know, maybe have some, you know, there'll be some changes of leadership and they'll have to be responsible to a different group of folks.
That's right. That's right. And I think, you know, and this is one of the places, right, where like we didn't completely agree on every aspect
Yeah.
of the map. And I think that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
I think that when we're trying to imagine how redistricting and those district lines can help build equity, we don't know at the end of the day until it's done, right? Like we
Yeah.
can only theorize about what that equity would look like. And so I think that's why the public commission was such a important part of this. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people felt like it was flawed because of that, or, you know, and it was too messy and there was just too many divergent, you know, competing competing interests, like
Yeah.
locally, you know, per neighborhood or whatnot. And I think that instead, if we were to look at it as an asset, you know, that
Yeah.
actually what an abundance of people who care about this city, right?
Yeah.
And then really want to think about how they're caring for their city
Yeah.
as a whole. Um, and so, yeah, so I feel like even though you can have like really divergent ideas about how redistricting can really help us,
Yeah.
and I think the other layer to that is that a lot of people see redistricting lines as like has been used in the past. Lines have been used in the
Yeah.
past to target communities and
Yeah.
to like leave people out, right? So you all know about redlining. So oftentimes people see that and they see them as lines of segregation. And
Yeah.
I think that one dynamic that I wish we could have spent some time talking about to the public was a little bit more around the impacts of segregation, the impacts of redlining,
Yeah.
and what the dynamics are now, right?
Yeah.
Because Oakland is its own ecosphere,
Yeah.
right? It's its own like ecosystem in terms of like politically and how policy actually happens, where money flows, who the money flowing with, and who's making decisions for who, right?
Yeah.
It plays out a little bit differently in Oakland. And I think that's why the public commission is important, because you have to be able to have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I mean, I think it was also messy because it was so public, right? Like
Yes.
there was nothing hidden. There was no back door. It was all in front of you at 1 a.m. in the morning. And sometimes it was rough, right? You know, like
Totally.
it was not a pretty process at all. Like it was messy. And Oakland can be messy sometimes, but I think it's also like, I don't doubt how much each person on that commission actually loves and cares for this city. Like whether they were here 2 years, whether they were here 20 years, like there's a real profound love for the city. It's just we do have divergent visions of how to make the city work because the city has a lot of problems.
That's right. That's right. And I think there were a lot of lessons for
Yeah.
even people who were calling in, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things I kept hearing was, you know, you should talk to the people in the community. And instead of listening to these organizations that are saying they represent communities. And I think that that's one place where I was like, oh, I wish we could, you know,
Yeah.
you could say it in public comment to some degree and address it so that people can really understand what like organizations like Oakland Rising, like how we can say we represent these people because, you know, we're a collaborative, our collaborative member organizations have membership base.
Yeah.
They have a say that come bubbling up to
Yeah.
us, and we're making decisions based on those pieces. It's not like, oh, I just sat down and Bobby, you, me, and just were like, what do we want? It was like there is a process to it, and I think that that often is one of those places because there are lobbyists
Yeah.
who are looking out for the self-interest of corporations or like very specific
Yeah.
people, developers, and
Yeah.
so they have seen their city um, you know basically pillaged, right? And so
Yeah.
so I understand where it's coming from, and then at the same time it's like, oh, there's a lot of things that we need to do to like prep people and prep the city to
Yeah.
have a full conversation about it.
Well, I think, I mean, you and I also have a culture of checking in with folks. And,
Right.
it's really interesting because sometimes even I felt myself challenged by something that I thought would be what was wanted.
Mm,
And a
mm,
perfect example is in District 1. I believe Mosswood is now in D3. And
that's
I
right.
reached out to folks in Mosswood and I was like, hey, what do you think about this? How do you feel about it? And they were actually like, no, we want to go to D3. And I was shocked. Like
Ooh,
in my mind, I was really having a hard time wrapping my brain around that. And then I realized like there are folks in D3 that validly felt like they have more in common with District 3 than District 1. And that speaks to a changing nature of D1,
that's right.
which I think is hard. It's hard for me because initially I also was, how am I inserting myself in like what I would love to see my neighborhood versus like what is best for the city at wide. Sometimes there was a challenge. Another perfect example is the issue of the area around the lake. Right now, D1 took some of that lake, and at first, as a D1 resident and a person of color, like I was a little nervous about that because it's a
Mm,
predominantly white community or a lot of high, and then I remember, well, like at the same time, like you want to preserve West Oakland, you want to preserve Chinatown. There's certain communities that you want to make sure don't get like displaced. And like on some levels, like I said, looking at that urban displacement map, so much of our community is now in post gentrification, right? And so how do we map citywide so that like I don't want to say that we're a lost district. That would be horrible to say. I love my people in my community. I love my district. Like, all of my, new and old
mm,
members. There's some amazing, amazing people. But it's like really thinking of community as a concern, right? And
right.
citywide. And
Right.
sometimes those, when you have those conversations and you see those tensions coming out, it's like, oh, wow. Okay, well, I'm looking to preserve D1, but wait a second, you're right. Like, we need to rethink about what makes sense, what communities make more sense with each other. And so I remember that shocking moment with some folks that, longtime Mosswood residents. And I was like, wow, I was not expecting that. But for them, yeah, that's
Yeah.
they've seen their community change. And so they want to go
That's
to
right.
the community where they feel that they can preserve themselves more.
Right. And then when and talking about that, so there were some pretty dramatic changes to some
Oof,
of our.
yes.
So for example, right, like parts of Coolidge area, Bartlett,
Yeah,
Diamond, um, and Laurel, like these things were all part of D4
yeah,
previously, and now it's cut off at the 580. So everything below the 580 now within
yeah,
district is in within District 5, which there was a competing interests of folks who or communities who were like, no, actually want to be in D4, but actually we heard a lot from from our community too that was like saying actually it goes, we think the Fruitvale neighborhood or what we consider San Antonio
yeah,
neighborhoods, that these actually go up farther than you think, right? And so it's really interesting to it's so hard that redistricting maps can't please everybody. That's just
yeah,
one thing for sure will not please everybody because everybody also sees their interaction with the city a little differently, right?
yeah,
And their lived experience are all slightly different. And so it's hard to just say like blanketly, like this is for sure where it
yeah,
lies. Um, the other thing that I noticed, and Bobby, we don't have to talk too much longer about it, but like that I was thinking about was like a lot of folks, I think,
yeah,
were a little confused. And I know that you used to work for Rebecca Kaplan's office, right? And
yeah,
so wanting to hear, like maybe we could like dispel for folks a little bit about like some economic interests or engines within the city, because I think people were starting to go like, you're going to segregate this and then that means all this money's going to stay in this district, and that's just not how it works.
And honestly, like I have a tremendous amount of empathy for District 6 and District 7 residents. There's a huge fight over the Coliseum.
That's
And
right.
I want to validate like everybody involved wanted the best for their community. Like
That's right.
there's nothing that was said or done that wasn't there. I think for me what's really hard is again the Coliseum has had a long identity as being part of D7. It's had a long identity of connection to the airport. It's had a long identity of people involved in negotiations around it that are District 7 residents. And I understand the emphasis of D6 folks wanting to move it forward because they wanted, in their own words, an economic engine. But it's like, it's this sort of very Oakland moment where it's like we have the flatlands fighting for each other for like limited resources. And fundamentally, I think that when we go back into a moment in time, this is going to be a decision that I don't know if it's going to have some serious ramifications because the process was done in a very, it was brought up by a commissioner in December. So it wasn't like something that had been going on forever. So I think it's going to have some serious ramifications. I mean, to us, for me, community is a concern with the number one primary. I think, go ahead, please.
No, what I was going to say, one of the things that was confusing to me about moving it from D6 to D7 is that actually the Coliseum has no population.
Yeah.
And so they were like fighting over this, and it was a quick, sudden move as part of the Redistricting Commission, which my understanding is that Councilmember Lauren Taylor had approached one of the commissioners at the Acoma Market in Black Liberation Zone for the Black Cultural Zone, that he was like advocating for a Coliseum to go into District 6.
Yep.
And so to me, it was sort of like that was a little like where did that come from? And it happened really quickly with people who, it was like this group of folks who wasn't really saying much about what district it should be in, and suddenly it got pushed into District 6 and just the Coliseum itself. And there was no real concern to me. It was like when we first started the process, Oakland Rising was advocating actually that as a community of interest, that the Coliseum area as a community of interest was from Seminary to 85th, from the water to International. So that as a whole should stay together. Yeah. But nobody wanted to do that. Yeah. Right? They wanted to split this. And I think that often causes, like if we were able to actually keep that as a community of interest whole, we wouldn't be fighting over this, right? Yeah. We might not be fighting over it the way that people are fighting over it. And it was just a quick, I don't know what happened there.
Well, a couple of things. So yes, on December 6th, 2021, I also got the same shock you did when, there's a part in the agenda where each commissioner talks about conversations they've had with elected officials. And apparently we made it also into acknowledgement. I mean, because we both reached out to different folks that are commissioners. But one of the commissioners, Commissioner Velasco, indicated that she'd been reached out by Councilmember Taylor. And I understand, I legally don't understand what the ramifications of that are. I know I heard through the scuttlebutt that some D7 residents filed an ethics complaint. So I don't know what's going to come of that. Because there is in the language of the ballot measure, like you can't interfere, if you're council member. So I don't know how the city attorney is going to rule on that. I mean, technically we're in this gray area where the city attorney already issued a petition to the courts about the fact that we missed our deadline as a commissioner. The commission missed the deadline. So I don't know what that's going to look like. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the Coliseum piece. I mean, I understand why people fought so much for it. I mean, having worked on the other side, having worked in San Francisco City Hall and in Oakland City Hall, my experience is that oftentimes when there's a project in your district, you as a council member or the supervisor are responsible for that. So people come to you, and a lot of other people defer to that supervisor or council member, right? And that's happened so many times where we may have had an issue with a project, but we're like, oh, but it's in District 7 or it's in District 1. So, let's let Dan or Treva or somebody, do that piece. And and then we'll share our thoughts publicly at the council meeting, or my boss would do that, right?
Right.
But I think that's where the piece came in, is that then that person becomes like the person who's part of that negotiation.
Right.
And so I'm curious, because I mean, it's hard. Again, you have a group of folks who've been negotiating this agreement and have been actively negotiating on the Coliseum out of one district. Now this other district is going to want access, and yet it's an asset that serves everybody, right? So it's a really good question that raises a lot of issues. And like I said, my biggest concern is it kind of came at the eighth inning or the last hour,
Yeah.
and it really didn't have enough time to develop the pros and cons, like you said. Like
Right.
there wasn't, it's such a rush process,
Right.
because, you had this deadline of December 31st. Now we're in this legal limbo. So there
Right.
isn't that space to really digest and figure out like what's the best possible scenario in this
Right.
instance. And I, again, I personally, just to be transparent, was advocating for the D7, just because it's such a big shift to remove such an asset from a community, without invalidating what the D6 people were saying. I'm just saying, like, the way it was done, it was really quick. And I
Yeah.
don't think we've really thought through what the implications of that.
Yeah, and I feel like, that to me shows that, maybe folks were feeling like their city council representation isn't actually representing them and isn't fighting for some of the needs that they have in their community in regards to something as large as the Coliseum, right?
Yeah.
And the impact that it has on their community. So,
Uh,
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the community benefits that could be negotiated,
yes,
it's incredible, right? I mean,
it's
those,
quite large,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so I mean, I think we're going to have to see how this pans out. So
yeah.
the next step is, now that they, was it February 2nd or 1st?
It was February 1st. So actually
1st, right.
today is the
Yeah.
14-day deadline.
14-day
So
deadline. So they
yeah,
spent the last 2 weeks, they posted it.
yeah,
And then, for 14 days, that public is supposed to be able to view it and look at it.
yeah,
And then I believe that they're having a meeting on the 17th, which, though, folks should know that it's the same day and likely similar time as the city council meeting where they're reviewing the environmental impact report for Howard Terminal. So I know that folks' interests in both of these are really important. And so just so that you know that these two things are happening at once. And I know at least some of our allies and some of our partner organizations are going to be at the Howard Terminal meeting with City Council to really push, because the environmental impact report was not given a really good long review. The community, it was like over 1,100 pages. So like people's ability to be able to read through all of that dense information wasn't enough time. And so there's going to be some push, I think, to have City Council give a little bit more time for that review. So
yeah,
just to let you know that one. But then the Redistricting Commission, I believe, will be meeting on the 17th, although it's not posted yet. So, but we're hoping that
yeah,
this map is approved. They do have enough votes, the 9 votes, to get it passed.
yeah.
But who knows? It could go completely sideways and we're back at square one, which will directly impact our ability to vote, to have clear district lines that we decided on and not by the state. And we need to have these in order to have precinct lines, which it determines where you vote and how you vote, where you vote for. So that impacts then, many more things, such as like, later on in November, which includes who's deciding to run and who can run for what seats and things like
Yeah.
that. So we need that sooner, because that democratic process is
Yeah.
going to get stalled, and we need to make sure that this is moving forward, because we don't want the state coming in and telling us these are the lines and this is how it's going to be for the next who knows amount of time.
Yeah, and I think,
we don't even know if it's for the next 10 years. We just know that at least for this election, they'll be setting our precinct lines, and
That's right.
that could determine who can run or not run, and that's not where we want to be.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of limbo state that we're in, I think, is really hard, right? Because I think it's forcing the process to move at a faster rate than it to not have those conversations that are necessary.
Right.
And yet we need to, because if we don't make a decision, if the commission doesn't vote this coming 17th, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if anybody knows what's going to happen. I mean, I know the city attorney already on January 7th did a petition to the court for failure to meet the December 31st timeline. So we're literally working against the clock. And the worst situation for me would be a situation where we lose our power to the state. We lose our power, our right as independent folks to do that. So, you know, here's to hoping some resolution soon.
Yeah. So I pinned my comment where I got on separately, and I put in, you know, that you can go to the Oakland Redistricting Commission website. You can see the proposed maps. For a second, I kind of tried to show it, but obviously it's really hard to show on IG Live. So go there, check it out, see where there's a live interactive map. You could type in your address, see where you land, possibly in the new redistricting maps. Call in once we find out, follow Oakland Rising to see when the actual commission meeting is happening. Once we land on this commission meeting, when we land on this map, the final map, and where we're going to move forward, we're going to write up a report on our end, like what happened, what our analysis was, and then we'll also share out like recommendations for how we think the next redistricting process should actually happen. And, you know, just thinking about it right now, I'm like, this needs to start in 2026.
Yes.
Right? We need to be engaging with high schools and colleges and like classrooms, engaging in community organizations so that they're talking to their members about what the census is, how that actually impacts the redistricting process, what does it mean to have representation, that we actually need that process a way ahead of time, and that we need to engage the city and make the city ensure that they're letting folks know early on in the process that this is happening.
And you just actually hit something that we didn't have a chance to really talk about very much, which is the fact that there's a real disconnect between, because this is not just the council, it's also for the school district.
That's right.
And there was a real disconnect with OUSD this cycle.
That's right.
And I think that was very hard, you know, because at times, like, I know, like, it's like we're looking at this to maximize the voting power of Black, Brown, and API folks, but we're also looking at it like, okay, school districts, if you're a parent, I'm a parent, we both have kids in OUSD, and it's like, oh, wait a second. We don't want to have to deal with 3 different, you know, school board commissioners in 3 different schools, you know.
That's right.
And so
we did a lot of pushing to make sure, like, for example, that Westlake Middle School stayed in District 3 because many of their students are in District 3. And then, like, in the midst of this, we saw one of the school closures was potentially going to be Westlake. And so it was like, no, we fought really hard for this. And so I think that's an important piece for folks to see that, right? Like, we see those as siloed things in the city. Like, the school district is in and of itself on its own, but it actually is so integral to our communities, so integral to representation. It's so integral to all of our lives. Even if you don't have kids, which I think a lot of people don't think about, right? Like, school district impacts the way our public transportation runs. It impacts, you know, where and how people cross streets, like physically cross a street, right? So I think that we need to just remind folks of that all the time too.
Yeah, but I appreciate what you said also to end on this note about like reflecting on this process and what are the best practices to bring into the next process. I you know, I'm hoping the commission meets at least another time after they finalize a vote to really get input on like how to better this process, because I think there are a lot of things that could change and could be done differently. And again, I don't put that on the commission. I think it was under-resourced. And I think that's a huge factor into how things played down. And it was the first time. And I think people now have a better sense of what to expect. But there's a lot of better practices we want to put in place, especially like going to communities that aren't going to come to you. Like, how to really do that.
How to do that. We did a few things. Like, we partnered with one of our partner organizations, Ella Baker Center, to do a mutual aid event. And we set up our redistricting table right before the food. So it was like, you had to come and talk to us. And then we got over 150 maps of COIs, right? And so that all went in. So I think those are ways that we could the thing is that I noticed this is not just about this redistricting piece,
Yeah.
but I often see organizing done this way, where people just sit at a table and wait for people to come talk to you. And actually, what we need to be doing is going and forcing, not forcing, but like putting ourselves in a place where it's like constant engagement.
Yeah.
Can I talk to you about this? Let me talk to you about this. Let me talk to you about this.
Yeah.
I stood at Old Oakland Farmers Market at different days in different places around the city when I was like, "Can I talk to you about redistricting?" And I talked to till my throat was dry, right? About what redistricting was and what
Yeah.
and hearing back from people about what that meant, and getting maps from people to submit to.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things we have to have, like full on engagement with the community.
Yeah.
So. Well, thank
Right
you,
on.
Bobby. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you. I
Yeah.
appreciate this conversation. So I pinned into the comments the redistricting commission website. So go
Yeah.
there, check out the map, make your comments there. You can email calvin at oakland.gov. Is that what it's? ca.gov. Damn it, Liz. oaklandca.gov. So that you can email the commissioners on your thoughts about the redistricting maps. We'll be putting out an e-blast this week on, what we think folks should be moving towards on this map, but mostly that this map needs to be finalized now. Like we don't have more time for it will impact our
Yeah.
elections. And so, and then check out Oakland Rising, oaklandrising.org
Yes.
/donate. You can donate to us. You can also click on sign up to get our e-blasts and our newsletters, and check us out on all our socials. But where can people find you and your organization?
We actually have a website. I was going to say, actually, there was one day I was like, I needed talking points, and I'm like, thank God for Oakland Rising's newsletter. So to shout out for your newsletter, because I was like, okay,
Hey.
I got it. Okay, I'm good. But people can. We have a couple different websites. We have the TODCO, which is the affordable housing website. So you can just go to just look up TODCO in Google. TODCO.org, I believe, is our thing. Or you can look up Build Affordable Faster California. We also have a Facebook. I can link that up as well. And it's buildaffordablefasterca.com. And there's a lot of fun things there. We do some polling, so we put up our polling. I'll link up our Oakland poll. We did a poll, which I think people will be really interested about. Mostly about affordable housing, which people really want. And I'm not just saying that; Oakland residents are saying that.
That's
So,
right.
so yeah, I'll be sure to put the link in the chat.
Thank you so much, Bobby.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate you. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
we'll see you next week. Oh, next week we won't have Monday meals because it's a holiday, but we will have we'll have a Tuesday lunch special. So it'll be IG Live on Tuesday at noon, and we'll be talking about democracy dollars, which is campaign finance here in
Oh, that's
Oakland.
right.
So
Yay.
I'm really excited about
That
that one,
is that
y'all.
is really exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
we were tracking that in the Seattle, and there's some great reports that came out about that from
Yeah,
Seattle.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll have somebody on next Tuesday to learn about that. So come back and learn about it.
Great. Thank you so
Thanks.
much, Liz. Thank you,
Thanks,
Oakland Rising.
Bobby.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.